They posted a Royal Guard recruitment notice in the hall, reporting directly to Archduke Curtis Schönberg. Everyone thought it was kinda dumb to put up a notice for that job here, of all places. Rumor had it that Curtis Schönberg was trouble, known for his nasty temper and explosive personality. But one seriously brave girl decided to take on the challenge and sign up to work for Duke Kurtz. This girl was Chloe, and even her friends couldn't talk her out of it. She was dead set on her decision. She figured the notice was posted here because nobody else wanted the gig. It mentioned a quarterly bonus of 200% upon appointment. And for Chloe, that was enough to keep her family fed for a season. Being dirt poor, this job meant she wouldn't have to starve or freeze for the first few months at least. Wars and risks aside, if she could just stick it out for a year, maybe the Archduke wouldn't be that bad. Nothing scared her or stood in her way, as long as her family was fed and warm. But now, as a newly appointed lieutenant, Chloe Abvans had to obey the Archduke without question. It all felt pretty harsh to her. Now she was convinced the Archduke really was being tough on her. Curtis's favorite thing was roll call, and she, like all the other subordinates, was ordered to keep her head down. Nobody lasted 2 months under that totally off-the-wall leader, Curtis. And honestly, being under a total jerk like that, the reason's pretty obvious. Roll call is just what it's called on paper. In reality, it's a disciplinary action. Chloe was having a hard time putting up with this treatment because she'd been working late and was exhausted. Furious, she wrote down how much she hated him, and even the adjutant had to carry out these ridiculous orders. Remembering that Schönberg was still a hero she served, she quickly threw the papers away. The Archduke was a workaholic, always burning the midnight oil, and his aides had to keep up. Fall asleep on his shift, and you're guaranteed a disciplinary action with consequences. Lost in thought about how to ditch these papers, Chloe even considered eating them. The girl pushed thoughts of reprimands aside. They paid her a ton, and she was already 3 months in. There were days she felt like going rogue and settling the score with the Archduke, but she managed to keep it together. Lieutenant Chloe Abvans was in a tough spot, serving under the Archduke. Remembering how Chloe laughed hysterically after joking around with him one day, he decided to make her pay for it. To keep her on her toes, he decided to dock her pay as punishment. Now she really wanted to get even. She was picturing some serious payback, but the Archduke interrupted her fantasies. At his request, she would be assisting him at a diplomatic banquet attended by Duke Glintrant. Chloe wanted to tell the Archduke that she didn't have a suitable dress for the occasion. Luckily, she had her Royal Guard uniform, so she didn't need a dress after all. The banquet was scheduled for 6 in the evening at Archduke Curtis Schönberg's mansion. It was a seriously huge house. A third-rank state official could definitely afford some serious luxury. Chloe arrived right on time, and a nosy butler greeted her at the mansion. He was dying to know why his lordship had been so insistent on having a female adjutant at the banquet. Chloe figured tonight's banquet was basically a husband-hunting ground for his lordship. More specifically, this mansion was supposed to be the meeting place for his lordship and Lady Glintrant. Chloe thought the lady probably had plenty of other decent candidates, but he had a few skeletons in his closet too. The girl didn't know what was being implied, and she wanted to know the Duke's downsides and weaknesses as well. Curtis Schönberg was kept waiting by the young lady, and he was seriously ticked off that he found her at the mansion later than he expected. And on top of that, she was wearing the same clothes he saw her in every day, the same kind of clothes he wore himself. But even if they wore the same clothes, there was a huge difference between them. Chloe felt super awkward and figured she deserved her wallflower nickname. The Archduke noticed the girl wasn't wearing any jewelry at all, and her clothes were all rumpled. After thinking for a sec, he took off his own accessory and offered it to Lieutenant Chloe, wanting to put it on her. He figured it wasn't right for his adjutant to be walking around looking like that, and demanded she at least wear this. She didn't get what was happening or why he was being so nice to her. The hall was dazzling. Lieutenant Abvans was staring intently, and Curtis called her out on it. His Majesty was there to greet Archduke Schönberg and Lieutenant Abvans at the mansion. His Majesty was looking for the Archduke to introduce him to his future bride, Lady Isabella Glintrant. Curtis was taken aback. He hadn't heard a thing about his bride or the wedding plans. Lady Abvans was hearing the bigwigs of Ivani's argue for the first time, and it was making her chest tighten up with stress. But the Archduke dared to tell His Majesty something. Even though the king wasn't in the mood to listen, Lieutenant Chloe Abvans was presented to His Highness as Curtis's chosen one. The girl wasn't expecting that kind of twist. Usually, life doesn't go her way. Now she could finally act on her thoughts and bring that lowlife to justice. From that moment on, their shared revenge against each other began, starting with the Archduke suggesting she get a haircut. But losing control in his rage, he was about to take off her whole head, and she barely escaped. As it turned out, Curtis Schenberg was way too uptight about everything around him. The Archduke tracked Chloe down and told her to stay put, 'cause he wasn't finished with his business. And on top of that, after looking over her report, he made her rewrite the whole damn thing, said it was atrocious. Chloe was down with whatever, but right now she wanted to see him grovel and told him to get on his knees. It was the first time he'd ever been humiliated like that, especially by a girl who worked for him. And she looked down at him, realizing her dream had come true. She'd finally brought that scumbag to his knees. The Archduke was trying his hardest to convince the king that they were actually head over heels for each other, and that Chloe Abvans, his love, who he'd recently found, was the one he was going to be with forever. He was saying such crazy stuff, she had to correct him, or things could go south real fast. Chloe kicked the Archduke in the leg, hoping to postpone this ridiculous conversation to a better time. But the Archduke was radiating a killer vibe, and her interruption had absolutely zero effect. He cut her off, grabbed her hand, squeezed it tight, and looked like he was about to drop a major truth bomb. Unscheduled promotion, rewards, a new position, special treatment, perks, plus paid vacation, a chance to renegotiate your annual salary, and all of that could be yours. Chloe really needed to know why he wanted to marry her, specifically, instead of someone more on his level. Turns out, in the Avans Empire, there's this thing called, well, a transaction between the rich and the poor. It's like, if the Archduke marries a commoner, he basically becomes one too. And that means he loses his right to inherit the throne. Those are the rules. To avoid that whole mess, he's got to marry someone from the aristocracy. Too bad for him, nobody meets the Archduke's standards. He just doesn't dig any of them. If the Archduke marries Lady Glintrate, it'll spark some serious good vibes between the two countries. So, a marriage like this should have made His Majesty real happy. And if the Archduke tries to find someone else to avoid the marriage, no one but a commoner would even consider his request. In that case, the Archduke could either flee the country or lose his right to the throne by marrying a commoner. He had to make a choice, and by adding a variable, he chose Chloe Abvans. Even though Chloe's family was dirt poor, surprisingly, they hold the title of baronet. That way, he can keep his status and avoid marrying the Duke's daughter, who he has absolutely no feelings for. Chloe's the kind of person who can't easily refuse the Duke's requests, and she's someone he can easily divorce. It seemed like things were working out a little too well for him, but the Archduke reminded her about the money. And he also mentioned the bonus, the job change, and the perks that come with it. She remembered that even soggy bread soaked in water tastes good. She remembered her family. If it wasn't for her, her family would be starving right now. She's the only one who can keep them fed. Chloe didn't have a choice. Without even thinking, she accepted his lordship's proposal. You gotta give something up to make a deal, and they put on a whole show for His Majesty. They got married, but Chloe was a total enigma. She was already plotting out her conversation with the Archduke in her head. It all looked super convincing, and the guests cheered the marriage, checking out the newlyweds. Curtis and Chloe looked so happy, nobody suspected a thing. Things used to be different. Before the Archduke bowed his head to his subordinate. The story of Avanis goes like this. Curtis was born to the King of Avans and Princess Glintrant. Curtis's mother was a really smart woman. She didn't want her kid to die from a hard life in the war. She demanded her precious child have status in both countries, and that's why he's got dual citizenship. The thing is, Curtis just kept getting hotter, smarter, and more talented as he got older. To fulfill his duty as the eldest son, he joined the army, and as an archduke, he had a claim to the throne. This situation really bugged the king, and His Highness had to do something about it. Maybe they wanted to stash him away under Glintrant before he took the throne, or they were planning to marry him off to Lady Arya from the Navy, who was head over heels for him. Curtis shot down that crazy idea, figuring it wouldn't end well. The Archduke had someone else in mind, though he didn't know if this girl would listen to him. It was that same lady who played along with Curtis so well and accepted the jewelry from him. He never even imagined she'd be so compliant in every situation. And Chloe's only just now realizing she's got this kind of talent. Memories flooded her mind. She remembered the king and their wedding to Curtis, because what they were planning was a sham, and lying to the king is basically treason. His Grace didn't understand why they'd kept their love a secret all this time. But the young lady explained it away by saying she doubted the Archduke's feelings for her. And now that he'd declared his intentions before His Majesty, Chloe supposedly realized he was genuine. They played this charade so carefully, making sure nobody suspected it was all a lie. Curtis was struggling to keep a straight face, and Chloe kept reminding him to stay focused. But no matter how hard they tried to fake their love, His Majesty just wasn't buying it. Their plan wasn't working, and they didn't know what to do next. They had to convince the king otherwise. Lieutenant Chloe had an idea. She'd present His Majesty with some kind of proof. There was something that was a dead giveaway about how much he loved her. That brooch on her chest was proof that her darling had proposed to her fair and square. The Schenberg family crest on the back of the piece confirmed it was the real deal. Even though His Highness might think this proof was part of some scheme, there wasn't anything else to go on. They decided to stop digging for dirt and quit getting on each other's nerves. After all, there was nothing to suggest their marriage was a sham, so there was no point in keeping the bad vibes going. The situation was settled, but His Highness wasn't happy with how things turned out. He was hoping for something more concrete. His Majesty still didn't believe what he was being told, but there wasn't anything he could do about it now. Going forward, the Archduke planned to ask the Archduchess to keep working with him, but this girl was seriously interested in their marriage and what it all meant for the future. The Archduke was just going to pretend they were in love, but things have changed. Chloe couldn't believe Curtis was asking her to fake being head over heels for the Archduke. It stung that she'd be entering her first marriage like this, with no romance, no love. Chloe called Curtis out for treating her unfairly, but he didn't seem to care. It eased her mind, knowing she wouldn't be the only one losing out. Now she needed something from him, too. After everything she'd been through, Curtis was going to pay her back for all of it, big time. Now that the Archduke desperately needs her and will do anything for the country, Chloe's going to bring him to his knees. Curtis Schenberg was shocked he was about to be brought to his knees again by his subordinate. Chloe, anticipating her revenge, was dying to see this guy groveling before her. She wanted him to pay for everything. The overtime, the punishments, the way he treated her. Chloe was dying for him to show her the kind of passion that would make her trust him completely. Curtis was taken aback that this was actually what she wanted from him most right now. She wasn't asking or ordering him anymore. She was practically begging him to get down on his knees already. Archduke Curtis wasn't rushing to grant her wish, because he'd forgotten to give her something else really important. The girl stood there bewildered, not understanding what was really going on. Curtis moved like lightning, decisively pulling out a small black box. Lieutenant Abvans, watching all this, was impatiently waiting to see how Curtis's little game would play out. This was a huge moment for Curtis. He was about to do something that meant the world to him. Inside the case, a ring shimmered. The same ring the late king used to propose to his mother. This time, he did get down on one knee and lower his head, but for a completely different reason. Curtis was down on one knee, ring in hand, asking Chloe to marry him. He was really trying to make it as romantic as possible, just the way Chloe Abvans liked it. It all happened in the way Chloe least expected. But was this really the right thing? Word that Archduke Schenberg had a bride-to-be even reached the Duchess of Glintland. That jewel in the case was actually a divine flame. Getting hitched without a proposal would be totally wrong, and Chloe was feeling pretty romantic that day. If this was Chloe's ultimate wish, Curtis nailed it better than anyone could have. But now the girl thought the whole thing was terrible, because that ancestral ring was actually weighing her down. Which means Curtis screwed up again, not understanding what she meant when she said to kneel. But it turned out to be much simpler. She used his favorite phrase, demanding him to bow his head. Curtis thought it was a joke and asked Chloe to repeat herself, making sure he understood correctly. The Archduke, getting up off his knees, tried to figure out why she was doing all this. But if he really thinks about what's going on, he'll get why and what she stands to gain from it. Since Chloe fulfilled all the Archduke's requests, she demanded he fulfill any wish of hers. Now he gets it. This was stone-cold payback, and Chloe wasn't even trying to hide it. The girl worried that, because of them, her family would now have to deal with the stares of other nobles. This marriage won't just affect her anymore, but the rest of her family too. From now on, her family will be pointed at and whispered about because of their low status. Chloe has 3 younger brothers and sisters back home who couldn't even finish school. Thanks to the Archduke's behavior today, her siblings are now in a pretty messed up situation. Chloe wouldn't have agreed to this marriage for all the money in the world. But it's a done deal now. Trying to fix things, Curtis Schenberg promised to take care of this whole mess with the nobles. She turned down his offer, but demanded that she be the one calling the shots in this contract. She wanted the Archduke to prove her dominance in every single thing he did. Because if he refuses these terms, he can go enjoy his new life on the shores of Glintrant. She thought maybe she'd been too harsh and said too much. She needed to keep it together, but in this situation, you gotta be tough. Now he's gonna pay for everything she went through while she was under his thumb. The Archduke had no choice but to obey the Archduchess's orders. In an instant, Curtis Schenberg found himself face down on the floor in front of Chloe Abvans. Nobody knew how long he'd have to hang upside down. But Chloe, seeing his determination, got scared he might get back at her, and she felt sorry for him. Ketris wasn't planning revenge on the girl he saw as the bride he'd been wanting. They agreed the deal was moving along nicely, and they should keep it up. But the Archduke really didn't want Chloe to become a casualty of this deal. The Archduke asked Chloe one more time, just to be clear, if she, Abvans, would become his wife. He was ready for Chloe, during their marriage, to take everything he had to offer. Chloe couldn't completely own his soul, but he was letting her take the reins for a while. She didn't want to be some temporary owner. He wasn't a dog. But she didn't have a choice. The girl made her choice and would become a temporary owner, as sad as it sounded. The Archduke was beaming, totally stoked that Chloe accepted the ring. After all, his mom's life took a turn for the better after she took this ring way back when. He swore to this girl that it would be a good omen for her too, for sure. Now that ring was sparkling on her finger. She was officially betrothed. And since they were now engaged, according to their customs, they were expected to spend some quality time alone tonight. The Archduchess was freaking out. She had to spend the whole night with this jerk. Putting Chloe's worries to rest, the Archduke clarified he wasn't expecting any overtime tonight. All she had to do was tweak the military training schedule for the entire year. Chloe couldn't believe it. He pushed her so hard, the poor thing just broke down in tears. The whole castle was buzzing about Chloe and the Archduke tying the knot. The Archduchess still didn't trust the Archduke's sincerity and secretly drew caricatures during breaks. Chloe's younger sister, Leah, didn't believe her older sister was being genuine about their engagement. Claiming she only did it for the money, Chloe had no choice but to agree with her. Chloe couldn't and wouldn't defend herself, deciding not to argue with her younger sister. Now, Leah didn't even believe that, not understanding who would marry her older sister for money. After playfully ruffling her younger sister's hair for saying such things, they started discussing the wedding day. The wedding was supposed to take place in 7 days, which was faster than Chloe had anticipated. Meanwhile, a report about Chloe Abvans was delivered to the Duchess of Glintland's house. Gathered around the table, they discussed the Archduke and his lover's scandalous behavior. Many feared Curtis, except for Chloe Abvans, and the way she referred to him drove the family insane. They thought saying stuff like that at a diplomatic banquet was seriously out of line. Chloe calling him darling, and Curtis turning down the king's marriage proposal? Total scandal. Even the prince sided with Curtis. For the royal family, that's just not done. The king was floored by how easily the Archduke claimed he didn't give a damn about the country's interests. The Duchess, chatting over tea, figured it would actually benefit their family. Since the people care about what's good for the country, they'll probably stick with His Majesty. They'd never support someone just looking out for number one. Duchess Glintland tried to convince the king that love affairs always crash and burn. After their talk, the Duchess was asked to stay a little longer, and she accepted. The Duchess just couldn't get over the fact that she still hadn't managed to meet Ivanis. She needed to see him just once before Chloe and Curtis's wedding. It was super important to her. But she wasn't giving up. She still had hope she'd see him. You know, hope springs eternal. The Duchess started asking about the stuff brought as a dowry. Picking out one of the vases, she ordered it sent over as a wedding gift. Meanwhile, back at Curtis's place, things were still hectic, tying up loose ends, you know? Right now, they were hashing out the details of Chloe's family moving and making sure they'd be comfy in the new place. The Archduchess's family was stoked about the move. Her siblings were pumped, firing off a million questions. Now her family would be safe, but she still had to check off all the boxes to become husband and wife. They started going over the requirements from both sides, and the first condition was read out to Curtis. The first item stated that he was prohibited from overworking during the contract. Chloe was getting stressed because Kurtz kept cutting her off, and this point was crucial for his reputation. Everyone already thinks he's a heartless boss who makes Chloe work overtime constantly. Even if being a boss and a husband are two different things, overtime was still going to be a thing for Chloe. She's going to have to play the part of an archduchess 24/7. And also, she'll have to go to surprise banquets, which is basically more overtime. But the Archduke promised her that when the royal guard duties are in effect, there'd be no overtime, which means the no overtime clause during the contract period was approved. First off, Curtis wanted to know if Chloe would continue serving as his aide after they got married. The girl agreed, because who else would want to be his personal aide? Point number 2 specified a separate fee for the contract and a salary increase. Even though the Archduke was loaded, he flat out refused to give her a raise. I mean, her salary doesn't even come out of his pocket, it's from the public treasury. So he came up with a special solution. Instead, he offered something way more interesting, guaranteeing $10 million a year, which meant a separate $1 million contract salary was a go. All that was left for Chloe Abvins to do was read the last, third clause of the agreement. It stated that Archduke Curtis would always obey Archduchess Chloe Abvins. There was no way the Archduke could agree to that. Maybe he should put her in her place for that kind of nerve. Curtis was getting seriously ticked off, and he felt like he needed to teach her a lesson. But Chloe just wanted to clarify a few things, adding some subclauses, not actually changing anything. The subclause stated that Curtis had to respect Chloe Abvins and consider her his superior. And according to the contract, Chloe gets 3 personal requests. Curtis figured she probably thought he was some genie, granting her every wish. But the girl had thought it all through, because what she's doing is borderline treason. And if His Majesty gets pissed, Chloe's gonna get it, not Archduke Curtis. So Chloe and her family are in way more danger than the Archduke. Now Curtis got it. She was offering 3 chances to act in her own best interest during the contract. Clause 3 said he always had to obey Chloe Abvins, and that was approved too. Now it was time to check out His Highness Curtis Schenberg's demands. The first clause said she had to do her best to fulfill her duty, and it was approved. In clause number 2, Chloe had to accept the fake relationship and not interfere. That's when the girl started thinking, could Curtis actually be seeing someone? I mean, they never agreed to stay in this fake relationship forever, so it shouldn't be a surprise. Chloe Abvins just couldn't believe the Archduke was even capable of having a relationship at all. It said that during the contract, Chloe wouldn't develop any personal interest in Ketris. But since they're supposed to be married, they'll have to put on a show, even for the servants. And to keep things simple, they'll have to share a bed. Now Chloe's got a new kind of interest she didn't have before, a mischievous kind of interest, which means clause 3, the one about personal feelings, has been crossed out and replaced. They decided that in bed, Chloe would tie up her hair and wear long clothes. And with that, the real contract was finalized, and they could start their life together. Everything they agreed on had to stay secret, especially from Agatha's little sister. Obviously, his little sister couldn't know anything about this sham. I mean, Agatha's so head over heels for that punk. She'd be with him forever, even without getting a payout like Chloe. They trusted Noel and asked him to cook up a fake contract to send to the royal family. All that's left is the dowry. But what kind of dowry can a warrior living on a salary even have? Archduke Curtis Schenberg threw out a number, 80 million. The dowry offered by Duchess Glintrant was also 80 million. They gotta compete with this family. That's just how these deals go down. Now Chloe's gonna have to work off an 80 million contract. She didn't know if she could live up to that kind of money, but the contract was drawn up anyway. And that's when they got to the main event of the wedding, her first wedding dress. Trying it on, Chloe was seriously bummed out by how uncomfortable it was. Despite the discomfort, the wedding dress, like a flower, was the centerpiece of the whole shebang. But the dress was too small, and there was absolutely no way to get a replacement. See, his lordship's mother wore this dress, and it was Curtis's way of showing Chloe his affection. No matter what she tried, She just couldn't get the dress on. Chloe was starting to freak out. That's when Curtis stepped in. He had a little more muscle, and he tightened the dress's ribbons with ease. They were so close at that moment that she could even feel his breath on her. He was trying to cinch the dress as tight as possible, and wouldn't you know it, the ribbons ripped and the girl took a spill. The fall hurt like hell, and for a second, she even thought Curtis was gonna jump her. The wedding was 3 days away, and there was no way they could get a new dress made in time, no matter how hard they tried. Chloe Abbins had an idea she didn't tell anyone about, deciding to keep it a surprise. Finally, the wonderful morning of the radiant wedding ceremony that everyone had been waiting for arrived. The day was beautiful, just like the groom himself. The sun was shining and birds were chirping. Everyone was waiting for the beautiful leading lady of this wonderful wedding, but she didn't look like she should. Chloe looked tired, but she had to memorize so much for these sacred vows. Prince Frederick, Curtis's nephew, graced them with his presence at the wedding. Prince Frederick wondered why the lady was marrying the Archduke in particular. He thought, maybe she's being pressured. And without any hesitation, he asked her to give him a sign if something was up. Frederick was approaching them to remind Curtis about the prayer he needed to attend. So now Chloe's stuck one-on-one with another big shot. And with the uncle gone, Frederick decided to get to the bottom of why she married the Archduke. The kid was testing her patience, but she still had to say they were head over heels for each other. But as it turned out, after the chaos at the banquet, her uncle went straight to see the kid. Curtis walked into the church, handed a paper to the pastor, and asked if he could, use their services. But the pastor was sweating bullets that this wedding would get him blacklisted from the kingdom. The Archduke promised that this was the last time he'd need the church's help with anything. Meanwhile, the conversation between the kid and Chloe Abvans kept going. And when he asked why she actually married the Archduke, she wanted to spill the beans. But she said that she saw him in the paper, learned about all his heroic deeds, and applied to be his aide. She lucked out landing this gig right away, and supposedly fell head over heels for the Archduke at first sight. Chloe might have laid it on a little thick with the story of how they met. But hey, she got a compliment out of it. A compliment saying that, all things considered, she actually fits the Archduchess role. Just then, the Archduke came back, and the young prince said his goodbyes and left. Everyone was on pins and needles waiting for the ceremony, gossiping about why the wedding was so rushed. And to top it off, the stunning Lady Glintrand arrived for the celebration. She was so gorgeous, she'd win even if she wasn't wearing a fancy dress or makeup. The wedding ceremony between Commander Curtis Siernak and Ivanis and Chloe Abvans was announced. Finally, the bride and groom, who everyone had been waiting for, entered the packed hall. Chloe was wearing a military uniform, which really threw the guests for a loop, since she was the Archduchess. They couldn't believe she showed up to her own wedding in boots and without a dress. Just 3 days before, when Chloe's ribs were screaming from the tight corset of the dress, she suggested a better idea. After all, the only required accessories for a royal wedding are the crown and the belt. Luckily, they had a crown. The Crown Prince Beatrice's wife sent it. But you can't just go out in your underwear with a crown and a belt. That'd be insane. And since they're the royal guard, the guard has its own ceremonial white uniform. And for a member of the royal guard, for whom duty comes first, they could completely avoid suspicion. It was a good idea from Chloe Abvans, and they'd wear this ceremonial military uniform to the wedding ceremony. The guests figured their outfits were some kind of political statement. But it looked good, and the late Queen Mildred's crown went perfectly with the uniform. Everyone there figured the bride wouldn't hold a candle to Duchess Glintrand, but they were wrong. They gave off totally different vibes, like night and day. The wedding vows began, and Father James Ruther started the ceremony. They were asked if they swore eternal fealty before the dragon guardians of Ivanessa. Curtis thought maybe it was true love, but he doubted it, since they'd have to part ways. But hey, she's got a pretty face. She could always get hitched again, rockin' another white dress. And then she'd have a happy face, not those furrowed brows she's sporting now. Still lost in his daydreams, Curtis was thinking her husband wouldn't be him. And for some reason, that bugged him. But there was so much to get through before that day even came. The bride was asked if she swore to be with her husband until the end of her days, and she said, "I do." So the big question was, did the groom have a sacred vow offering? Turns out our groom did. It was this gorgeous, shimmering piece of jewelry. Leaning in so close to Chloe, his lips almost touching hers, he fastened this beautiful necklace around her neck. The necklace was on, and even with the uniform, it looked amazing. But that wasn't all. Curtis had something else for his bride. He pulled out a silk-lined box. Inside was a ring called Divine Flame. The crowd gasped. It was the late Queen Mildred's ring. This ring was given to Chloe Abvans as a sign of love and sincerity. Looks like the Archduke was really laying it all on the line, giving her that ring. It was weird how people were reacting. This is pretty standard wedding stuff, right? Normally, he'd give it to Chloe Schenberg, but now he was giving it to Chloe Abvans. Basically, it's got nothing to do with the marriage and belongs to Chloe personally now. The girl didn't get why she needed it, but Curtis told her to keep it down and just take it for now. He explained that it was a gift to make up for his past actions. Now, they needed to seal the vows with a kiss, which was to be expected. It is a wedding. It all felt like a dream for both Chloe and Curtis, since they had to follow the pastor's instructions, not their hearts. The wedding ceremony was calm and peaceful, with the guests mingling throughout the palace. Lady Glintrand also showed up, relying entirely on her assets. Rumor had it this marriage was rushed because His Majesty was pushing for it. But the proof of their love was the kiss, which everyone in the hall witnessed. Those two are so sickeningly perfect, they skipped the reception and bolted right after the ceremony. My guess is the newlyweds ran off to get busy. But the truth is, they ran to brush their teeth, because nobody warned them about the mandatory kissing. They brushed in a hurry, talking about that kiss that totally grossed Chloe out. It wasn't just a peck, but Curtis couldn't help it, or people would start whispering about a fake romance. And since that's how things played out, Chloe demanded her well-deserved compensation for the trouble. He promised she'd get whatever she wanted after the divorce, but for now, they had business to handle. This was her first day as Archduchess, so that meant work for the servants too. Opening the window, Curtis showed Chloe Abvans all of her subordinates at her disposal. There were so many of them that the girl felt burdened and almost wanted to back out. You could bet your ass 80% of those people were spies working for His Majesty. One of the servants was a real class act, an older head butler named Philip Deltante. All those countless Schenberg family servants were under Philip's thumb. He was planning to run the royal palace staff, but that all changed after talking to the king. Once he found out he'd be the head butler in the Archduke's territory, he started taking orders from the king, and at the king's request, he was reporting on Curtis's every move, looking for weaknesses and spilling the tea. That's how he ended up in their family. And of course, before that, he saw how much of a workaholic the Archduke was. The butler thought Curtis should be out there living it up, the way he should. But now things are changing, because Curtis now has an Archduchess, a girl from a poor family, and the Navy. Philip figured she was just dreaming of a marriage like this to climb the social ladder. He was planning to watch every single move of that stuck-up Archduke, or so he thought. Philip waited for the archducal couple to appear, so he could greet them personally. He figured a girl who dreamed of a successful marriage and actually pulled it off was bound to screw up somehow. Seeing Chloe as a thorn in His Majesty's side, he mocked her every little mistake. Chloe knew she couldn't afford to make a single misstep in front of these countless servants, but she slipped on the slick floor, which was exactly what the butler was waiting for. Philip told her to be more careful, and then greeted His Majesty. The butler laid it on thick, saying the palace was blooming anew because of Chloe's arrival. But to himself, looking at the girl, he thought the Archduke must have seriously low standards. After introductions, Chloe replied that she didn't know her way around yet, and would need the butler's help. It was weird how the butler, being in His Majesty's service, ended up working for Schönberg. But supposedly, on His Majesty's orders, the butler started serving His Highness Schönberg. And if he was just a butler, Chloe wondered why he acted like he was higher up the food chain. Chloe's opinion of the butler took a nosedive after he kept trying to get under her skin. Now it was Chloe's turn to laugh at the butler and bust his chops every chance she got. Philip then started trying everything he could to distract the Archduchess and kept apologizing to her. He kept trying to smooth things over with compliments, but she wasn't buying what he was selling anymore. The butler was really going all out to try and catch Chloe slipping up on her manners. But she wasn't born yesterday, and realized his insults were just textbook etiquette backhanded compliments. Philip Deltante was making excuses, insisting he was devoted to Milady with all his heart. He was choosing his words carefully, like he was searching for help but couldn't find it. Even the servants were getting worried. Philip thought he could mess with her, but it totally backfired. Chloe's wit was just too sharp. So, after apologizing for crossing the line, he decided to back down. Chloe was annoyed, but she didn't want to fire the butler. She just demanded a proper apology. Like, to make up for ruining her mood, maybe he should plant his face on the floor. Philip Delton was totally thrown. He was being humiliated in front of all the other servants. Chloe jokingly threatened him, saying she used to be in the Navy and might accidentally shoot him. He was ordered to stand face down on the floor for 3 hours as punishment, and everyone left him there alone. Now the humiliated Philip was stuck with his misery, head on the floor, and couldn't do a thing about it. Chloe and Curtis went to lunch, enjoying sweet wine and fancy snacks, and were totally happy. From the window, they watched the butler finally get what he deserved for being such a creep. Chloe was stoked. All her stress just melted away. Next on the agenda, figuring out the sleeping arrangements for the night. Dinner was done, and they were shown to the bath, because tonight was their wedding night. Everything was set for them to relax, and Curtis escorted his chosen bride, Chloe, to his bedroom. It was pretty dark in there, but you could still see the weapons, easily within reach. Now she was stuck living in a dump like this, with a plain, boring ceiling. Curtis confessed it was the first time a girl had ever been in his bedroom, but he didn't exactly get a pat on the back. Right then, the Archduchess just wanted to take a gun and blast that jerk Schenberg into next week. Curtis was having a blast messing with Chloe. Since there was no gun, he just burst out laughing. Marrying a woman like that Archduchess, he knew he was asking for this kind of reaction. Otherwise, their closeness at today's ceremony would seem to come out of nowhere. He wondered if that kiss, their closeness during the dress fitting, and the gift only mattered to him. Back then, Curtis explained to Chloe that he was the kind of guy who valued virtue, but she didn't care. Not even that her amazing husband would remain, well, pure, even after the wedding. The Archduke kept teasing her relentlessly about her scandalous outfit, but the Archduchess trusted his animal instincts, since she'd been in some compromising situations with him. And if need be, she was going to kick him so hard he wouldn't even think about heirs. After that, she planned to escape through the window, turning the would-be attacker Archduke over to His Majesty. The Archduke was getting tired of Chloe's dumb jokes, because something like that would never happen. And with that, the jokes died down, and the girl decided to chill and catch some Z's. But Curtis had other ideas for her. A whole lot of stuff still needed doing. Dude was dead serious, 'cause even 3 hours of sleep is a luxury for newlyweds. A beautiful morning dawned. The sun was up, and our amazing Chloe woke up. Like always, she was starving and dreaming of a killer breakfast. The maid said she'd bring a light breakfast. Nothing too heavy first thing. Over breakfast, Chloe decided to brag that Curtis would never find a wife as hardworking as her. He didn't disagree, but still, hearing that was kinda hilarious. Curtis was rushing Chloe, 'cause they had a ton more to get done. Chloe wouldn't shut up at the table and called Curtis her husband, which totally grossed her out. We've got that diplomatic banquet coming up, which means schmoozing with all the fancy aristocrats. And don't forget, we still have to write thank you notes for the wedding gifts, including one from Isabel Glintrant. Curtis thought that gift was kinda cheap since it wasn't hand-delivered, even though Chloe liked it. She was itching to get back to work, just as soon as they got all this stuff sorted out. But the Archduke told her to relax and pick out a killer dress and some jewelry for the banquet. Chloe was instructed to hit up the high-end shops on Fafetten Street and find the best dress and jewels. Stepping outside, they saw something unbelievable, a sheet from their first night together hanging from a balcony. Meanwhile, Agatha Monpiece was bawling her eyes out over the heartless Duke, who forgot her and married someone else. She's Noel Monpice's little sister, and she was begging her aunt, through tears, to help her out. But there's nothing we can do. They're already married, her aunt tried to console her. That's her aunt, the Marchioness of Flanders, His Majesty's younger sister and Curtis's older sister. She was having a rough day and asked for ice water, but since there was no ice, she had to settle for tea. Someone was sent to the royal family for ice, but since His Majesty was busy, it's been days and they still haven't gotten any. Looking at the news in the paper, they saw a picture of a soiled sheet hanging on the palace terrace. They took it as pettiness and blackmail, showing that supporting Curtis wasn't worth it. The girl couldn't stand the heat, but there was nothing she could do, since the ice storage belonged to the state. Putting the newspaper on the table, she saw a beautiful vase that seemed high quality, but her aunt, the Marchioness, warned her against it, knowing that vase only brought trouble, which she didn't want to talk about. And her aunt also asked her how much longer Agatha was going to keep chasing after Curtis Schenberg. But it was such a powerful love that the girl was helpless. Despite all her efforts, her older brother wouldn't help her, and even the divine flame ring was given to another girl. Now, completely obsessed with Schenberg, Agatha convinced her aunt to go to Basilur and buy something way better than the ring. They used to sell the divine flame there, so now they're probably selling something even more powerful. She wanted to go to Basilur so badly that she promised her aunt ice cream to get her to go. Montpus couldn't resist that offer and agreed to go with Agatha. Meanwhile, a stained sheet was hanging up like it was art, and nobody knew who did it. Showing something like that was considered scandalous back then, and Chloe was going to make whoever did it pay. Chloe noticed Curtis's bandaged hand and realized he used his own blood for this little performance. Whether anyone believed in their love and relationship now was pretty much pointless. The king wasn't actually demanding proof of their wedding night, since everyone knew this marriage was rushed anyway. Sergeant Dubois is now escorting Mrs. Schoenberg to Fafetten Street, replacing Montpy. Kurtz was surprised, and Sergeant Dubois remarked that Kurtz usually had a different look on his face. He glared at Dubois with contempt. The sergeant was eyeing Chloe, and Curtis knew things were about to get interesting. Sergeant Dubois and Chloe used to be friends, and the Archduke was aware of this. Curtis trusted the sergeant, because his wife meant the world to him. After clarifying everything and coming to an agreement, they headed into town. While strolling through the city, checking out all the cool spots, they stumbled upon a cookie shop where Chloe's sister used to hang out. The sergeant was still a little salty, but since they were once friends, she didn't want to ruin their bond. They finally arrived at that jewelry store, Basilur. Spotting the Archduchess's carriage, a swarm of reporters rushed towards them. It was all those reporters hounding her, blocking the store entrance with a million questions. Beat up and disheveled, they barely squeezed through the crowd and got inside. There to greet them was the sixth heiress of the jewelry store, a girl named Basilur. As a greeting, the heiress Basilur wanted to kiss the girl's hand, but to protect her ladyship, Sergeant Dubois wouldn't allow it. Actually, Basilur just wanted to get another glimpse of that divine flame. Her father found that stone, and it sat unsold for ages because it was so small. But after careful cutting, it blossomed and sold, and she was glad to see it shining on Chloe's hand again. Offering to take them up to the second floor, they were greeted by her younger sister, Camille. Her sister did handcrafting on the third floor of this very building. And there they were, in the main showroom, the pride of Basilur. It was immaculate. Everything sparkled, but Chloe wasn't really into jewelry, so they suggested she sit down and think it over. Chloe was looking for cheap stuff, but their store only made top-of-the-line pieces. The maid was trying to get her to look at the details of the jewelry and pick something out. So Chloe decided to check out all of Basilur's stuff, since it would be hard to find anywhere else. Chloe's eyes landed on a piece called Bloody Queen that no one had been able to get their hands on. Turns out, the whole district carried high-end stuff like this, but sometimes the price was a real deal-breaker. It was a tough choice, so they suggested she pick a piece based on her favorite color. The Archduchess thought they were just shiny rocks, not necessities. And if you can't even eat them, then why blow millions on something like that? But Chloe had to pick out some jewelry. She needed something to wear out. Even with her high roller status, Chloe usually rocked simple dresses, just because she dug the color. Totally indecisive, she finally locked eyes on Lady Basilur's necklace. That necklace wasn't for sale, so Camille suggested Chloe check out her dad's private collection, the one they never showed anyone. That collection was so cute and gorgeous. Even a kid could find something they liked in there. They used to sell these pieces, but the store's new policy forced them to put a hold on sales. Chloe decided to take a peek at a tiara that was originally made for a princess. Since their dad passed, they haven't been able to make jewelry like that for the last 10 years. They started importing this black opal about 5 years back. It almost started a whole thing with the Navy. While they were telling the story of this gem, Montpus walked in on them. Nobody saw her come in. Nobody knew how she got in. The place was locked down with people. It was that pathetic girl, the one who was head over heels for Curtis, but getting nothing back. Montpeace went ballistic, laying into Chloe and Sergeant Dubois so hard it made everyone super uncomfortable. Nothing anyone said could calm her down. It just made her even more furious. Montpeace totally lost it and accused Chloe of hooking up with Sergeant Dubois. Chloe just laughed in Montpeace's face, radiating this crazy, otherworldly glow. She was trying to figure out how old this young lady was, guessing she couldn't be more than 20. Chloe knew Montpeace was mad at her, but she really didn't want any drama. This wild girl kept trash-talking the Archduchess, claiming she was stepping out on her husband right after the wedding night. Chloe was clueless who she was talking about, and looking around, the only possibility was the sergeant. Turns out, that claim actually had some backup from the Montpeace side. About 2 months back, when Yrsa Dubois was throwing one back, there was some talk about the sergeant's grown-up life. He was tired of hearing the marriage nagging ever since he came of age, and just wanted to live free. The sergeant's buddies were ribbing him, saying he was taking way too long to find a wife and would never find one at all. That's when one of his friends pitched him an idea that he happily jumped on while he was a little tipsy. The idea was to tell his family a little white lie and say Chloe Abvins was his future wife. They figured if his family heard the sergeant was planning to get hitched, they'd finally lay off his back. Chloe was down with the idea, and as a thank you, the friends asked Yrsa to pour the girl 100 shots. After that, things got so wild that Yrsa's place was turned upside down. As a reward, Chloe got dozens of boxes of top-shelf cookies, and they were delicious. Chloe said it was all a drunken prank, but Yrsa still bought into the whole charade. What high society lady would go along with something so crazy just for some cookies? That's what the Archduchess was thinking. Montpeace couldn't believe she dated that lieutenant for 2 months, then stabbed him in the back by marrying Curtis. She wondered if the master knew that Chloe was running around with her friend. Luckily, the Archduchess couldn't care less what that girl thought of her personal life. She pointed out to Montpeace that she was just a junior sergeant, while Chloe was a lieutenant, so basically her boss. I mean, the young lady was just the daughter of Count Montpeace, while Chloe was Archduchess Schönberg, which meant the Archduchess's status was way higher than the daughter of some count. But then, for some reason, the girl burst into tears, and Chloe figured it was because of her big, unrequited love for the Archduke. And no matter how hard Montpeace tried to hide it, Chloe was totally right. While they were busy figuring out who was more important and who should bail from Basileure first, Marie walked up. This woman was at the very top of Curtis's list of respected aristocrats. Her name was Marchioness Flandria, and she was the king's younger sister. No wonder Agatha Montpeace was barking so fearlessly, Chloe thought. The Marchioness apologized to Camille for barging in uninvited, even though they already had a meeting with other clients. She didn't need to apologize to Camille, since she was an old friend who hadn't visited Basileure in ages. Curtis Schönberg showed up right then, because Noel insisted he not leave his wife alone, especially so soon after their wedding. The Marchioness apologized again for bursting in without warning, and Curtis, calling her sister, told her not to worry about it. Everyone was surprised to hear such warm words directed at the Marchioness. The guests decided to head upstairs to see more of the jewelry. While in Basileure, the Archduke overheard Chloe's entire conversation with Lady Montpeace, along with the Marchioness of Flanders. They listened to Chloe's story that everyone in the guard knew. The Archduke was shaken. He couldn't believe his ears, because he heard something that made him doubt Chloe. But it was just the drunken rantings of the 1st Division commander. Curtis was surprised by how much his wife cared for Agatha when she broke down crying over her feelings for him. He couldn't figure out if she was naive or clever, worrying about Montpeace in a situation like this. Aunt Marie also overheard Agatha's conversation with the others. Now Curtis wasn't hiding anymore, and offered to gift the Archduchess items from the shop. There were several tiaras and necklaces here that the previous king had ordered for Princess Marietta. Chloe understood why Basileure hadn't shown her the jewelry. The Marchioness didn't want to damage her relationship with Curtis. One of the tiaras Chloe's sister liked had a gem that money just couldn't buy. Their dad put extra care into making that tiara, so the girls couldn't afford to treat it carelessly. Cutting through all the small talk, Curtis decided to formally introduce them to his wife, Chloe Ree David Schönberg. His sister, still fanning herself, was thinking that maybe fate itself brought them together. Lady Montpeace couldn't believe the news, hoping that Curtis would say it was all just a big misunderstanding. But unfortunately for her, it turned out to be the cold, hard truth. Agatha was yelling and demanding to know why he dumped her and married another woman. But Curtis Shenberg saw that her behavior hadn't improved, and she was still as reckless as ever. He'd once wanted to make her his archduchess, but seeing her thoughtless actions, he changed his mind. He explained he didn't ditch her to marry someone else, and her social standing had nothing to do with his feelings for her. Montpes said she joined the royal guard because she was so damn in love with him. When he found out, he was pissed. He never would have let her do that. Agatha burst into tears, and Auntie was even more bummed, saying we'd have to postpone the ice cream until next time. Lady Montpes was taken away to chill out, and everyone breathed a sigh of relief. The Marchioness apologized again for the incident at the store, then asked Chloe to introduce her sisters. There was Leah, who took after the dad's side, and Iris, who looked like her mom. And then there was another little sister, the chattiest and most hyper of the bunch. The lady was thinking of giving Lady Iris the tiara she was wearing as an apology. But Chloe laughed, because Curtis decided to apologize for her by letting his wife protect her pride. After that, they went to get ice cream. Everything was great, and Erza escorted her sisters. They're supposed to meet up at Eleanor's soon, and Curtis has to bring his wife, at the Marchioness's request. That's what Chloe gathered from the Marchioness's words, since she did save Curtis's skin today. Chloe's never been to Eleanor's before, seeing as it's a well-known salon run by female officers. Now she not only has to attend this gathering of high society ladies, but she's got to organize it too. Lady Chloe Abvans was chowing down on that ice cream like there was no tomorrow, and even wanted to take some to go, packed in ice. But it was gonna cost a little more than Curtis was expecting, and Chloe got flustered. Not knowing how high-class aristocrats do things, she stood up and got close to her husband to see if taking it to go was even allowed. He said no way, so she decided to send it to Marchioness Flanders instead. He agreed to that, but they'd need a ton of ice, and on top of that, the Marchioness has an ice cellar at her place. Chloe being all up in his personal space was making Curtis feel a little hot under the collar, so he asked her to back off a bit. The girl thought it was because it's rude to talk standing up, but it was something else entirely. Also, she figured maybe he didn't like the perfume Julia had put on her. Curtis confirmed it, which really pissed Chloe off, considering he was just sharing a bed with her not long ago. Chloe was stoked she sent the ice cream, because the Marchioness could really enjoy it now. Curtis was amazed at how insightful she was, sending a ton of ice with the ice cream. The jewelers kept thanking her too, all because of their order. The Archduke ordered that Chloe get all the jewelry she touched. They sold half of Lady Camille's collection, even her personal pieces. Chloe looked like she wasn't happy, even though she said the opposite, and that she liked everything. Curtis was just teasing her, trying to figure out if she was into him. And the Archduchess was making it crystal clear she wasn't feeling him. Once they were done, they headed off to get some real clothes, this time by her standards. This time, she was going to show Archduke Curtis Shenberg what true extravagance looked like. For footwear, she wanted boots that were actually comfortable, and she picked pigskin for the lining. She passed on the wide-brimmed hat, opting for a short visor and simple embellishments instead. After ordering everything exactly how she wanted, Chloe looked a lot less withdrawn and lost than she had at the jeweler's. She often ordered clothes for Leah and Iris, but unlike them, she usually just wore her military uniform. Chloe explained that because of their family's hard times, Iris had been turned down by a lot of schools, so she needed to at least dress decently so she wouldn't catch so much flack. And that's when Curtis decided to suggest Chloe hire a private tutor. Chloe shot back that, usually, the relatives of a lady who's married don't live in her new place, though with a 40 grand salary, she could feed them, clothe them, put shoes on their feet, raise them, and still drop a decent amount to doll them up. Seeing the beautiful fabric in Chloe's hands, the Archduke decided to buy it for her too, figuring it really suited her. No matter how you slice it, even though she's usually rocking a military uniform, she's actually enjoying this shopping spree. More than likely, when she's ordering clothes for her sisters, she's thinking about what look good on her and what she likes best. Curtis figured Chloe probably doesn't regret giving up her share, since she's looking out for her sisters. Seeing her like this, he knew bringing her here was the right call. Chloe, stoked that she managed to drop that much cash, showed Curtis the receipt, but he wasn't surprised at all, even though she knew she'd spent a crazy amount. Curtis suggested she buy a house too. Chloe agreed, but she forbade tearing down the old one, 'cause she's waiting for her parents to come home. Her deadbeat parents had been living overseas for years. Even if there weren't any jewels or fancy clothes there, Curtis figured the Archduchess's family home was too exposed being right by the road. But it wasn't just about her parents. Chloe was sure it'd be a joke if she ended up living in a house from her soon-to-be ex after the divorce. But Curtis was so into her that he actually forgot about their planned split. Chloe, looking at herself in the mirror, was thinking about how uncomfortable she felt, even though it was beautiful and expensive. Maybe it's because she felt like it didn't belong to her, just like everything else. Chloe stared at herself in the mirror for so long that at one point she thought it just didn't suit her. Actually, it looked amazing on her, so Curtis pointed out that she was staring at herself in the mirror for way too long. Chloe couldn't believe her ears. Could this guy really say something that would make her change her mind right away? She felt weird because she'd never worn anything like it before, but it was cute and comfy, as long as she didn't think about the price tag. Truth is, that outfit cost a fortune, but to the Archduke, it was pocket change. She could never get used to this, 'cause these things just weren't her. Right then, she figured she wasn't a real Archduchess, and their marriage was just a show. And someday, when she leaves this stage, she'll go back to being the real her. Then Curtis will be left alone on this stage, surrounded by these people, hungry for more of the act. She didn't want to be the only one feeling pathetic and unwanted. On the way home, Chloe watched Curtis, trying to figure out what he was thinking being around her. But even if he was thinking about her, his face didn't show a thing. He was calm as always. Curtis asked Chloe to lay off talking to Lieutenant Dubois for a while. He didn't want her, as his wife, having random connections with other guys. That could only mean the Archduke overheard their conversation that day. And Chloe, wanting to avoid any misunderstandings, explained that she and the lieutenant were just friends. Then Curtis shot back, saying there's no such thing as friendship between a man and a woman. Meanwhile, a distraught Agatha, thinking about her beloved, couldn't calm down because she loved him so much. They tried to soothe her by reminding her about her mother, who couldn't even sleep because she didn't want to get married. But Agatha wouldn't calm down, no matter what they said. After all, you can fix insomnia with medicine, but you couldn't fix the Archduke's marriage, not even with medical help. Agatha understood that Chloe didn't love the Archduke at all, and it wasn't just a lack of love, it was almost contempt. The humiliation from 3 years ago, that her brother reminded her of, proved that he didn't love her. The poor girl was so upset that she jumped out of the carriage and ran off without looking back. Maybe we should have gone after Agatha, but we figured we'd leave her be. She'll probably come back when she's hungry. The second she bolted, she hated all of them, especially her brother for bringing up that thing from 3 years ago, and her mom, who never understood her feelings and kept pushing her to get married. That woman who married the Archduke, even though she wasn't even into him. And even this amazing Archduke right now, she hated him the most of all. She didn't want to marry some regular Joe off the street, and she kept saying it through her tears. As she ran, listing all her grievances in her head, she realized she was lost and didn't know where to go. She just walked wherever her eyes led her and ended up in some dark, unknown place. It looked a little dangerous, but intriguing, and she wanted to wander around the dark alleys. In one of the alleys, she overheard 2 bums talking, making a deal involving some kind of substance. She was terrified and wanted to go home, but on the way, a woman caught her eye. Squinting through the darkness, she noticed the woman's clothes looked noble. It was Isabel Glintrand. Why she was in such a dump was anyone's guess, and Agatha wondered if maybe she was a spy. Agatha figured her own messed-up feelings were more important than any of this, and remembering Curtiz, she hurried home. Meanwhile, back at the castle, Chloe Shenberg was living the quiet life, without a care in the world. She didn't know how long it would last, so she was just soaking it all in. But things weren't peaceful for long after the honeymoon, and everything was about to change. Everywhere you turned, people were whispering that their marriage was probably just for show. Work started up again, and they had a scheduled meeting with Admiral Victor. The meeting was happening because Victor was supposed to deliver a message from His Majesty. General Shenberg's wedding stirred up a hornet's nest in the Guard. The knights split into 3 main camps. Some felt bad for Chloe. Others figured she was genuinely smitten, even if her brains were the size of a pea. And the last group? They thought Chloe was just trying to climb the social ladder by aiming for the Archduchess title. Rumor had it her family situation was a mess, and that she had no shame, power being the only thing she cared about. But there were still those who believed Chloe was just trying to get ahead, and their opinion was the most common. Everyone shut their traps when squad leader Dubois walked in. He'd overheard a lot and wanted to know what they were jawing about. The knights, saying it was just a joke, were hoping for some leniency, but the guard leader was floored that the royal guard was cracking jokes that insulted the Archduchess, a member of the royal family. He threatened to tell the commander of the third squad all about their hilarious sense of humor. Even though they apologized, they were warned that next time, their life in the guard wouldn't be so fun anymore. Everyone and their mother was trying to get the dirt on Chloe and Curtis's relationship. The insults were flying, nasty jokes coming from every direction. Dubois was still racking his brain about why Chloe got married, and why she was in uniform instead of a killer dress, and whether it was right to broadcast their bedroom business to the whole damn world. It was almost unbelievable she picked that guy and got zero respect from him. There's been plenty of times when women get hitched to a real piece of work, tricked into it. He thought, feeling for Chloe, that as an aide, always by Curtis's side, she knew how ruthless the guy was. So why Chloe chose him? He just couldn't figure it out. Saying that girl was sneaking around with Curtis felt off. Truth is, Dubois wanted to ask Chloe if she was okay, but he was scared to, even though they were close. He wanted her to open up about her past relationships, but he also felt like he was being pushed away, and he couldn't tell if it was real. Chloe was just so distant. That's why he was acting awkward and reserved. And now he was regretting it, especially since even when Agatha blew Chloe off, he couldn't do anything about it. When that guy, Curtis, showed up like some kind of knight in shining armor, Dubois felt like he was being kicked to the curb, like he was suddenly irrelevant. Sarah came over because she had a personal problem she wanted to talk about, but they immediately sat her down at the table. It was about her mother. She wanted to invite Her Grace to a meeting. It shouldn't be that hard, but Her Grace the Archduchess turns down all invitations. So, Admiral Victor was supposed to deliver His Majesty's message. They need to throw a housewarming party. It needs to be a really fancy housewarming party, with all the high-ranking nobles and the entire royal family. And Archduchess Chloe Schenberg has to organize it, since she's part of the royal family now too. This marked the 28th anniversary of the duchy's diplomatic ties with Glintrand. But since the engagement between Glintrand and Schönberg had fallen apart, the banquet had to go smoothly. Chloe suggested more seasoned royals than herself, but one was down with a killer cold. And the other, the Marchioness of Flanders, was tied up with another assignment from His Majesty. There was no point arguing about it. In short, Victor told them to get their act together, no excuses. And they promised they would, but that wasn't his point. Victor wanted to remind them that he was the one who introduced them and brought Officer Berg into the Navy. Telling them to watch their step, the Admiral pointed out they were acting like they couldn't stand each other. If they were going to play this game, they needed to sell it, not make it so obvious they were keeping their distance. Even if His Majesty's a bit clueless, he'd see right through it, so they better start acting like they like each other. It was a beautiful, sunny day, but for Chloe and Curtis, it started off a little differently. First off, Curtis suggested to his wife that they hold hands to throw off suspicion from the guards. But the Archduchess really didn't want to do that, and since she had no choice, she had to agree. Spotting them, people around them whispered about their great love, because it looked believable. Now they were following Admiral Victor's advice, and always walked holding hands, even if they really didn't want to. They didn't keep their distance anymore, because they hadn't realized before that it made their love look fake. On top of all that, Kurtz had this look on his face that needed fixing ASAP, or rumors of a falling out would start flying. Also, the Admiral mentioned a potential shakeup. His Majesty wanted to remove Chloe from her position as adjutant, but that wasn't gonna fly. His Majesty used all his power and tricks to try and make it happen, but in the end, he totally failed. And that restrictive contract, the one that paid a ton of money in exchange for never being able to leave, was impossible to forget. Before Chloe showed up, finding an aide for Curtis was such a nightmare. The Admiral even got the King's seal. The royal seal can't be challenged, not even by the King himself. So to get rid of Chloe, you need Curtis's okay. Curtis was stoked that he was giving the King a hard time. Chloe figured it'd be smarter for Curtis to let her go and pretend to obey the King. Even though he really wanted to protect her, Chloe thought the best move was to toss her to the king like a bone. And meanwhile, he could quietly get ready for his next play. Ever since Chloe Abvans took the name Schönberg, she's been busting her butt to live up to her responsibilities. Chloe knew exactly what she was getting into. She'd gamed out every possible scenario, including getting canned. While strolling around the kingdom, Curtis kept his ears open, felt like they were being watched. But it was just the gardeners, no threat there. Truth is, the Archduke's been dodging assassins since he was a kid, so he's got a real sixth sense for when people are around. He also knew Chloe wasn't nearly as careful as he was about that kind of thing. Then, during one of their fights, Chloe calls him Brigadier General, even though she never calls him that. That was a callback to Clause 3 of their marriage contract, the one that said Keatris always had to obey her. Keatris felt like Chloe was calling him trash, and he hated that she said it in front of other people. She knew she messed up and wanted to apologize. But Keatris, knowing the lieutenant wasn't the sharpest tool in the shed, could understand where she was coming from. Being in the middle of the palace, she should have watched her mouth, and she knew it. But her personality just wouldn't let her be too polite. She couldn't help it. Feels like if you killed off her personality, she'd die too, 'cause she always did exactly what she wanted. So, she better off just taking out her opponent without a second thought. In the heart of the kingdom, it felt like the whole world was watching the beloved Archduchess rise again. To Curtis Schönberg, Chloe was like a superior officer, and he respected her for it. For Chloe, it was a condition of the marriage, and she was absolutely certain about that. She ordered him to take 2 steps forward, bringing him closer to her. Even though he was more obedient than she thought, now she'd have to look up at him, and that was a pain. So, she suggested he sit on the nearest bench, and she started the conversation. She asked him how long he'd been serving, and he answered that he'd been serving for 12 years, or rather, it was his 12th year. Now she was curious about how much training a new recruit goes through before being assigned to a unit, and it takes 2 months. And now she wanted to know how long it had been since they got married, and it had only been 10 days. Look, we can just call this a learning period, right? Rookies make mistakes, and that's why she's apologizing. She didn't get why he was being such a jerk, blaming her so hard for mistakes. After, he asked her to marry him. She called him out for treating his own wife worse than he'd treat some green recruit. Seeing how pissed off Curtis was getting, she was about ready to give the ring back. Curtis apologized for being harsh and told her not to do that. Then, out of nowhere, he pulled her in real tight, not explaining anything or even asking if it was okay. Even after Chloe saw someone lurking behind them, she still didn't understand what Curtis was up to. She wondered if those guys could even hear their hushed voices. Now the Archduke could easily apologize while holding Chloe close. He knew she was mad, but he told her not to waste one of her 3 chances like that. But she was repeating her sister Leia, who always said, "If you keep something around, it'll turn to crap." That just cracked them up, and with a personality like that, Curtis could never ditch her. How could he leave a duchess in front of the king, knowing she'd be swarmed the second she opened her mouth? So whether it's Admiral Victor or anyone else, he's gonna have to play every card he's got. To Chloe, those words sounded like he was gonna protect her. But whatever Chloe thought, he swore he wouldn't throw her to his brother like bait. He'd rather face the music himself. Chloe didn't believe those words were meant for her. It felt like they belonged to someone else. Others were listening in at that moment. They understood each other and hugged even tighter. While they were still being watched, Chloe suggested the Brigadier General get down on one knee to sell their relationship. He knew he was going to get his clothes dirty, but right then, he didn't care. He never acted normal around Chloe anyway. The way he took the bait, how those words stung him and flooded him with emotion, none of it mattered. Curtis did it without even thinking, like he'd fully absorbed the general's teachings, and now they should hold hands, because everyone knows they're married, so there's nothing to be shy about. Archduke Schönberg has now ignored the king's orders to dismiss Lieutenant Chloe for the 4th time. But he didn't care if it was 5 or 6, as the prince of the Ivanese family, exercising his legal right, refused the king. The king couldn't trust his wife to organize the banquet, afraid she'd screw it up and embarrass them. We're talking about a diplomatic reception, and the Archduchess will remain a lieutenant in the royal guard. And according to the military code of the ruling house, Evans obeys Curtis's orders. He didn't deny that he'd fulfill his duty as a prince, but strictly within the bounds of military discipline. Right now, the king couldn't do anything, because he'd just be making things even worse. Chloe's words about throwing her to the king were also true, but then he wouldn't see that crazy look on the king's face. He figured yesterday's hug with Chloe was just a reflexive reaction to the pleasure surge. Maybe Kurtz would give Chloe a bonus for that and go shopping with her. And since the conversation with the king was over, he headed for the exit, hearing in pursuit, "Don't come back." Well, now that things have gone this far, all that's left is to really get under the king's skin. But Curtis's good mood didn't last long. Meeting these boneheads ruined everything. They were talking about how Curtis, Mr. Clean Warrior, had touched someone else's hand, and that he willingly held someone's hand, and that someone was Chloe Abvans, and that was against the rules. Introducing Lieutenant Erza Dubois and Corporal Sarah de Tournia. And the real crime here was Lieutenant Abvans's beauty, which was off the charts. Laying it on a little thick with the comments about my wife, and those congratulations on our marriage were way too familiar. They apologized and promised to be better, but Chloe told them to chill, knowing they were just friends. Captain Tournier addressed Lieutenant Abvans about a personal matter. The thing is, her mother, Countess de Tournier, would really love to personally greet the Archduchess. Her mother sent 2 daughters to the army, which is a huge point of pride, and the Archduke would like to visit her, even for a minute. And since Curtis will be escorting her, she asked Chloe if it would be okay for him to take her arm. It's only his first day back on the job, and he's short on time, so they hurried. The first day back at work after the wedding was surprisingly calm, and Chloe relaxed a little. Sitting in her office, she was happy that everything was going as expected. The only question was when Erza would cool off. But her relaxed focus was interrupted by an uninvited guest. Their conversation kicked off with her saying the Archduchess's office looked totally inappropriate. It was Madame Bring, an aide the king himself picked, thinking she'd be a good influence and keep an eye on Chloe. She absolutely hated that a royal's workspace looked so unprofessional. She explained she was there on the king's orders, regarding the big reception everyone was prepping for. She claimed that since Chloe hadn't lost her title, getting help from the royal family was, shall we say, complicated. Madame Bring immediately started barking orders in the Archduke's office and got called out on it right away. That piece of work, trying to justify herself, saw nothing wrong with suggesting the newlyweds take a load off. Chloe offered her the ladies' chamber, but she thought it was too cramped and not suitable for older women. The Archduchess understood why she had to stick her neck out for this royal busybody, play nice, and be agreeable. Because apparently, suggesting they sit on the bed was just beyond the pale for Madame Bring, so Chloe offered to let her help standing up, but even that seemed to Madame worse than treating her like a servant. Chloe thought she was dealing with someone with some backbone, but turns out Bring's just a gossiping old hag. Bring also couldn't wrap her head around why the girl and the Archduke were turning down the king's favor. Madame was yapping so much and about everything, Chloe just tuned her out and got to work. Because apparently the old bag wasn't done running her mouth, and Chloe's being rude by not listening. Bring figured she was only being so nice to the girl because of the king. Chloe's family only got their title recently, so she's never had to plan or even attend events like this. So she had to ask Bring how these things usually go. Madame Bring took the question as a joke, but even the wedding reception after the engagement was a first for Chloe. Bring called Chloe's admission a disgrace, since the girl was third in the court hierarchy. Chloe didn't see it as a disgrace, but Madame explained that high status comes with high expectations. After all, a ruler's gotta know everything, and not knowing stuff is a major embarrassment. That's why she's asking all these questions now, since His Majesty sent Madame to help her and meet the king's expectations. From now on, Madame's gotta turn Chloe into a real ruler, even if it's gonna be ridiculously hard. As an aide, Chloe learned one thing. Big shots don't have to get bogged down in every little detail themselves. They're important and irreplaceable people, and they only deal with important and irreplaceable stuff. Simply put, the small stuff can be passed down to the little guys, like Chloe used to be. Preparing the royal banquet is definitely important, and Chloe Le David Berg should rightfully lead it. But the catch is, taking on everything from start to finish is no longer appropriate for someone of such high standing. Bottom line, details like learning how to organize banquets are now Madame Bring's responsibility. Training started, and first things first, Gotta nail down the party's purpose and who absolutely has to be there. The party's celebrating 28 years of diplomatic ties with Glintrand. The guest list includes the Glintrand delegation and anyone connected to that country. From our local bigwigs, we're talking Countess Annelle and her husband, Baron LeBlanc, Viscount Fleur and his wife, the Rihanna family, and Baron Wars. We gotta send out handwritten invites to these specific VIPs on the list. The invites need to have touching words about the 28-year anniversary, and it's gotta be all handwritten. This is gonna be tough, because the only handwriting she's mastered is that official palace script. If some other official writes it in that font for her, no one will even notice. And she's gotta memorize all these nobles' faces. She learned all their names before the wedding, anyway. Now Chloe needs to learn how to greet these foreign aristocrats properly. First off, keep your back straight. Don't bend at the spine or lower back. Left leg stays back, only bend your right knee. Chloe was super impressed. Madame Bring was a total pro at bowing. Chloe received the record of all the banquets from the last 20 years. After thanking Lieutenant Noel, Chloe was convinced he wrote the whole thing out by hand. She was so blown away, she thought he was practically an angel. Actually, the Archduke was saying that he was planning to go to the Royal Archives himself. State affairs aren't some kid's game. They're important events, so of course they gotta be documented. Chloe didn't get why Curtis was bringing this up, since she was sure Lieutenant Noel had copied it all. Then the Archduke told her to stop fawning over it and start memorizing at least one letter from it. And Chloe shot back that he was just being picky, and that he could learn a thing or two from the lieutenant who copied the whole thing by hand. And also, Noel doesn't force anyone to work overtime, and she ran off to try and learn something, anything. While the Archduchess was busy practicing her curtsies, Bring decided to ask a question that was super important to her. She wanted to know if the way she'd been treated was genuine praise and humility. The girl decided to stop messing around and answer honestly, and her answer was no. Then the madam tried to explain that she was just sincerely trying to help, which was true, because if she'd wanted to brown-nose the king, she could have fed her false info and made her look like a total fool. But she has a sense of responsibility. She really lives up to her reputation. She's someone who knows what dignity and etiquette are, and that the help she's giving and will give is legit. That's why Chloe apologized to the older lady who was just trying to do her job honestly. Chloe respected His Majesty because she was also a subject of Ivanus, but Bring didn't understand what she was getting at. She was about to say that Bring was here specifically to mold her ignorant self into a worthy ruler. The dance lessons continued, and for a beginner, she was actually doing pretty well. Chloe was on duty and short on time, but Madame couldn't let Avance be put in an awkward spot. They almost got into it, and since things were heating up, the girl blamed everything on the Archduke and told him to take it up with him, not her. But His Grace, Curtis, was trying his best to avoid any kind of scandal at that moment. Madame explained that yesterday afternoon, he personally took the protocol for the welcoming ceremony from the Royal Archives. It was clear that the lieutenant hadn't prepared these records at all, and Noel's appearance on the Duke's orders was proof. The general didn't expect Chloe to go so far as to accuse him of disgrace, but he acknowledged his share of responsibility. The Archduchess knew he'd heard everything, but she just didn't understand why he always showed up at the most crucial moments. Before the diplomatic banquet started, Eleanora's meeting still had to take place, and time was running out. Chloe didn't get a say in any of this. They just used company time to train the Archduchess. The day to show off Madame Bring's handiwork came faster than anyone expected. Today's the Eleanor meeting, and Chloe's official debut. His Highness has arrived. They gave him the head seat at the table. One of the guests was Lieutenant Theodora de Tonnerre, Sarah Tonnerre's older sister. She fought under Curtis. Her place in the hall is ready, and the meeting starts as soon as she sits down. So, with the Marquis of Flanders absent, she'll take the most honored seat. And off in the distance was the Archduchess's old Navy buddy and best friend, Laura Legaultier-Cloix. It's been ages. She asked Chloe if she remembered her, and was stoked that her bestie hadn't forgotten her. She quit the service, got married, and became part of the Gautier Viscount family, dedicating herself completely to her home. But her husband thought staying home was bad for her, and suggested she check out their gathering. They were such close friends. They even signed up for the Navy together for the money. The girls agreed they'd still keep their friendship strong. And after thanking her, Laura just said her first name, which wasn't really done in the military. Lieutenant Chloe didn't think Laura should be so familiar, since in the army, you're supposed to use ranks. But Madame Bring explained that things were different at Eleanor's gatherings, and there she wasn't a senior lieutenant, but Archduchess Berg. And if anyone showed disrespect, it wouldn't just be a challenge to her house, but an insult to the royal family. Chloe understood that today she was there to support not only the Archduchess, but also for the glory of Yvonne's. So Chloe shouldn't rely on personal connections either, if she's got such an important job to do. Chloe sounded convincing, hoping everyone there would get her point. She was trying to be impartial and fair without getting too chummy. And Laura, her best friend, understood the deep meaning behind Her Royal Highness's words and didn't argue, hoping Chloe would understand her desire to help, even if it was just out of old friendship. Someone suggested Lady Felpatine take charge of the food prep, since she had experience. Plus, they had to figure out the staff assignments, and it all felt like too much for Chloe. She figured if it weren't for Theodora, things could totally go sideways, and maybe Theodora should be the Archduchess. After all, Chloe just had to make the decisions, and she felt like everyone was working way too hard because of her. Ideally, the prince's wife or the Marquis of Flanders should be handling this. But who knows if the princess will even show up to the banquet? The reception was getting close. The guest list felt a mile long, and she had to greet every single person on it. Social skills were super important, and if her ladyship struggled, people from the assembly promised to help her out. Lady Monpus was also at that meeting, and she kept trying to get under Chloe's skin. The meeting dragged on, and Lady Avon and Crayon had to pick out the furniture, while the rest would handle decorating the hall. The assignments were done, and everyone headed off to their stations. Chloe, along with her friends Laura and Theodora, started picking out tableware, paying close attention to the color. They were talking about how the late Queen Mildred's marriage to the previous king made it impossible to establish certain connections. And since the late queen had passed away, they were worried that white tableware would be associated with death. For Chloe, the color white was associated with the queen's wedding dress, but most likely, the king wouldn't approve of white. And since her ladyship was from the fleet, they decided to look at blue tableware to highlight the fleet's influence. Chloe found high society exhausting, where everyone had clear agendas and rehearsed speeches. Like, Lady Monpus is here just to bust the Archduchess's chops, and Laura wants to network her way in, now that Chloe's the Archduchess. Then there's Theodora, the real mystery. She was helping, but with zero warmth. It wasn't just that she didn't want to get involved in social drama. It was something else entirely. Her thoughts were interrupted by Madame Bring, who said His Highness the Archduke was here to see her. Apparently, the Archduke had an urgent message for her and had to escort her personally. The Archduke himself walked in, didn't greet anyone, and headed straight for Chloe. Without a word to anyone, he told her to come with him. And Chloe was thrilled because she was so tired. She didn't want to stay another minute. After saying goodbye to Theodora, she promised to handle the rest of the issues herself. It was time for dance lessons. Madame Brint was teaching them, constantly rushing and speeding up the tempo. When Chloe asked what he wanted to talk about, pulling her away from her duties, he said it was just about a runaway maid, but that was just an excuse. During their dance lessons, they had plenty of time to discuss the misunderstandings that had cropped up during their service. And also, all the times they were jealous of each other, even though they tried to hide it. The Archduke, holding Chloe close in the dance, asked if she got jealous of him, and she said she didn't. But knowing better, he asked her not to be jealous, at least not of Officer Tournier, because he realized that trying to woo two women in the guard was a bit much, even for him. Chloe was thinking that if she wasn't serving, or if Sarah or Theodora retired, and the Archduke asked what she was thinking about, and Chloe replied that the runaway maid had been treated badly. When he was on his own, he went through dozens of aides, and with that kind of treatment, things were bound to blow up eventually. The madam didn't let them talk for long and constantly drove them, never giving them a break. This dance was so fast, Chloe was tripping all over this ridiculously huge dress. She was chewing out Curtez for making her wear it, saying he could just look at the maids in their dresses if he wanted to. They couldn't let their guard down. Madame Bring was still throwing curveballs left and right. But Chloe found time to chat, and this time, she was curious about what the Archduke and Tournier were talking about the other day. The dance went on, and so did their conversations, like about how Madame Dubois was feeling under the weather. and how her son's a total idiot for letting his woman get snatched, leaving him all alone. The Archduke asked her if anyone had ever deceived her, and told her to really think about it and answer honestly. Curtis was asking out of jealousy because every time he saw that guy, and the way he looked at Chloe, it drove him nuts. He even wondered if there was more to that whole deal with the boxes of sweets than met the eye. Even if Chloe was innocent, who knows what that other guy was really thinking? And she shot back that if she had any brains, she wouldn't have married him in the first place, and he should be grateful she's such an idiot. Curtis was blown away by every word the Archduchess said. It was like a masterpiece, and whoever picked her was a total genius. Preparations in the hall were in full swing. The girls were finishing setting the table. Laura, knowing that Thornier belonged to the 8th Army Regiment, wondered why she wasn't in Siltier. It turned out that she was only temporarily assigned to that regiment, having received orders to guard a VIP. As she arranged the dishes, Lieutenant Thornier really disliked the blue plates. She thought they looked too clunky. And since soldiers are supposed to be resourceful, Laura suggested swapping them out for dishes of a different color. The girls were tired and decided to take a break, sharing their amazing stories with each other. Lady Montpes interrupted their chat, deeming it inappropriate and an insult to His Highness Berg's name. But nobody was trying to insult his name. Lady Montpes, as usual, totally misunderstood. She never thought Montpes would defend the Archduchess's interests so fiercely. The lady herself didn't understand why she was defending the woman who'd stolen the Archduke right out from under her. But the Archduchess had once taken pity on Montpes, feeling for her tears, and that still weighed on her conscience. Montpes said that if Laura was part of Eleanor's circle, she should set a good example for the sake of the crown. Theodora cut into the conversation, forbidding them from talking about people who weren't there. The break was over, and they went back to work, all of them exhausted and wishing the reception would end already. The Archduchess still had a ceremony to get through, but first they had to wait for the Marquise of Flanders. Lieutenant Tournier, sitting in her office, wrote in her journal that the weather was clear outside, but her heart was heavy. She'd been in charge of protecting Duchess Glintrand for 2 weeks now. Suddenly, someone burst into the office with the news that Duchess Glintrand had vanished again. But she wasn't some hired killer, just a regular aristocrat, and the lieutenant couldn't figure out where she got skills like that. Now she's slipping past security like a ghost. But before, she'd get lost in the garden and use it as an excuse to ditch. The day before yesterday, she was looking for the restroom and just fell behind, then vanished completely. And yesterday, she felt so bad about bothering the army with her stuff that she disappeared again afterwards. She's ditched hundreds of times with all sorts of lame excuses, and today she's taken off somewhere too. Nobody understood how she managed to escape, and the timing of her getaways was totally unpredictable. Tornia's nerves were shot, she was desperate, and when she found Glintrand, she warned her that she was a suspect for espionage. But in response, Duchess Glintrand became even more elaborate in her disappearing act. Even the king waved it off and told her to leave her alone, because a woman getting over a breakup needs to soothe her heart. And then Lieutenant Tournier got the news that Duchess Glintrand had been found. Everyone was totally shocked when they found out the Duchess was with the king. The king summoned Lieutenant Tournier, saying that Archduke Berg, who's supposedly fighting for the country, had shown his true colors, and since she was also part of Eleanor's circle, he wanted Tournier to keep an eye on the Archduchess. She hated being treated like this, realizing that maybe it was all happening because of what went down yesterday. Yesterday, she and her sister were happily chatting about her meeting with the Archduke and the invite to visit them whenever she was free. Things were so messed up that she was planning to write a ton in her diary today. At this 28th anniversary, Chloe will officially make her debut into high society. It was a beautiful summer ball, and everything was so romantic, everyone was thrilled. People were snidely whispering that His Majesty sent Madame Bring to Archduchess Chloe to educate her. The ball was organized perfectly, but that's all Eleanor, and whatever you say, the king was merciful since he prevented a total disaster. Well, look who finally decided to grace us with her presence. Her Grace, the Archduchess. All the bigwigs are swarming around, trying to get acquainted and buttering her up with compliments. They say her husband's so perfect, she fades into the background. Maybe that's why he's in such great shape. Chloe heard both praise and snide remarks that day, but she just didn't have the energy to pay them any mind. First things first, she wanted to eat. And even if she was just a temporary archduchess, she was going to enjoy the perks while they lasted. She was so hungry that she got way too into taste testing the food. Chloe didn't appreciate the Archduke's sarcasm. I mean, last time she checked, eating wasn't against the rules for archduchesses. And while everyone was pretending to listen to her, she seized the moment to share her thoughts with Curtis. She told him how she'd hoped for a slightly less hectic life after getting married. And to keep those hopes alive, she needed to do something about the fact that she was working more and getting even less time to eat. Hearing that, everyone present called them a comedy act. And then Chloe addressed the guests, telling them how Curtis had been making her life difficult, even though rumors about it had been circulating for a while and even leaked to the press. Even though the royal guard was famous for its strictness, it had at least one upside. They fed you well and regularly. But now that she was an archduchess, she didn't even have time to eat, and that was just too much for her. She admitted that if it hadn't been for the ladies of the Eleanor Assembly, she would have been in real trouble. They supported her during the most chaotic period, helped her cope, and now the ball was shaping up to be a huge success. Looking at the ball, Chloe couldn't contain her gratitude. This was the blessing of the great dragon Ayabenares and Gran Asade. They were also happy to help Her Highness, and Chloe liked their reaction. And now, to cement her successful image, all that remained was to listen to all these people. Now that she was the archduchess and hostess of the ball, there was no escape, and she had to give everyone their turn. Chloe's got to turn on the charm big time today, in front of all these people. His Grace Count Oren was pleased to meet her. Chloe knew him. He oversaw the southern mines, and this social chit-chat felt like it was dragging on forever. Curtis was worried about his wife and offered to bring her some fruit, even though Chloe thought he'd recently been giving her grief about overeating. The kingdom was a total madhouse, and the endless chatter between the Archduke and Chloe just wouldn't stop. Exhausted and starving, Chloe didn't turn down anything. Not the sweet fruit, not the cheese. She was at her breaking point. Finally, His Royal Majesty arrived, but he was with Duchess Glintrand. They were walking arm in arm, smiles plastered on their faces, looking all loved up.